Is it possible to make a game title entirely out of red flags? SD Gundam Gachapon Senshi 2 Capsule Senki, to use the full title, is a title that might as well be a video game horror story. Capsule Senki could be loosely translated as Record of the Capsule War. But let's start off with the first warning sign. SD Gundam. The SD means super deformed, and that refers to the cutesy big head style of art that you sometimes see in Japanese media. SD Gundam was the spin-off of the Gundam series, the originator of the giant piloted war machine genre, and SD Gundam was intended for a very young audience. And as a result of that, every Japanese game console since the Famicom is infested with SD Gundam games. And they're almost inevitably terrible. And then there's the other big scare word in that title, Gachapon. Okay, in 1989 they didn't know what a scourge that word would be upon video games come the 21st century. Here they're using the original meaning of Gachapon, the capsules you get out of vending machines with little toys in them. There's no random distribution of what you get, and no microtransactions required. As you might have guessed from the number 2 in the title, this is a sequel, but it's not the second game in the series. The original SD Gundam Gachapon Senshi was a disk system game, and this one was intended to be a disk system game as well. But with that platform quickly collapsing, Bandai decided to migrate the sequel over to the regular Famicom. But they still had the resources for a disk system game, so they quickly rushed out what they called a map collection to the disc writer kiosks. Now, despite being called a map collection, it's not an expansion pack, it's a sequel. It stands alone, they just didn't update any of the game mechanics. The cartridge for SD Gundam 2 is a bit unusual. There's 2 different versions of the cartridge, black and blue. Blue is considerably rarer than black, but as far as I can tell, there's actually no difference between the contents of the cartridges. Presumably the blue cartridge is from a later printing. That's a lot of preamble. What exactly is SD Gundam Gachapon Senshi 2 Capsule Senki? Well, it's a Famicom Wars clone. Okay, not literally, especially since the first SD Gundam game in this style predates Famicom Wars by 9 months. It's just Famicom Wars is the most popular game in this particular strategy genre. The game gives you 30 maps to play on, and your goal on every map is the same. Capture all of the production facilities on the other side. You earn income by capturing any building, and you spend that income by highlighting one of your production facilities and picking out a new giant robot to build. Most of your new units will get cranked out in just a turn, but a few of them may take multiple turns. You also move all of your units each turn, and naturally they each have different movement speeds. One thing that I noticed in this game is that the rough terrain is really rough. You'll have a very difficult time crossing deserts and water. In fact, most of the lower priced units can only move 1 square at a time in those. Although some units can move through certain types of terrain easier than others. A marine unit will have an easier time navigating the water, for example. Even forests will bog you down pretty badly. And some stages have impassable barriers. Like here, there's an inside and outside of the colony that you're fighting over. The early steps of the game are a rush for resources. You need those buildings because you need the income every turn to buy more units. And falling behind on that income track means you'll get quickly overwhelmed. When you collide with a hostile unit, it's time for battle. And here it switches to an action stage where you can freely move around the screen. Your robots have 3 different attacks. A short-ranged one by pressing B, a long-ranged attack by pressing A, and a super attack by pressing both buttons simultaneously. Units recover to full health in between turns, but that does mean that if there is a difficult opponent, you could wear them down with a lot of attacks all on the same turn. I found these action stages to be a bit rough. The enemy has a tendency to run away and shoot you from a distance, and it's really hard to dodge their shots. I noticed that if you get in close, you seem to do better in melee range with most units. There are power-ups that will float around the arena too that can be collected, like a clock that will give you more battle time, or a cat that will give you a little bit of cash. And there's a variety of hazards in the arena. Like when you fight in water, if you're not a marine unit, you're always bobbing up to the surface. One thing about your robots, not all of them are created equal. There's a few units that people regard as worthless, and you'll really have to do some experimentation to figure out what you should be using. Once you're done building, moving, and battling, you can hit the A and B buttons simultaneously to end your turn. Pressing the start button will give you an option to save the game, and there's 3 save slots with battery storage here. One of the most memorable things in SD Gundam Gachapon Senshi 2 is what happens when you win a scenario. Once you've captured the enemy production facility, your robots have a little celebration, and one of them accidentally shoots down a colony. The city that you fought so hard to take over is destroyed, and you are left as the ruler of ashes. I know Gundam as a series tends to have an anti-war message, but I wasn't expecting it to be put in the cute version for kids like this. For a game whose title is essentially the same as finding a fluorescently colored animal in a tropical rainforest, SD Gundam Gachapon Senki 2 is actually pretty good. The action scenes could be better, but there's an enormous variety of units, an absolutely huge selection of scenarios, and in general it's really approachable. In fact, I found multiple people calling this the best Gundam game on the Famicom. I don't think I'd go that far, and that's because we're going to see 3 more sequels, and I recall liking one of the later games more. Still, this is one of the better strategy games we've seen on the Famicom. I can definitely understand why Gundam fans were really happy with it.